Hi, my name is Fatima, and my research paper is about the expansion of presidential powers and its effect on American democratic values after 9/11. Initially, when I did send out my proposal to Dr. Sharp, I was leaning towards focusing on governmental powers overall. So I wanted to look at both presidential and congressional powers and after 9/11 and how it expanded if it did in any way. But then when I realized that the focus was going to be too broad and I couldn't really find any research pertaining to both, I just kind of narrowed down my topic and just focused on presidential powers. And the two subfields that my research paper will focus on is American politics and public policy. The reason why I say this is because I'll be looking at the relations between Congress and presidents in this research, which kind of accounts for American politics. And for public policy, I'll be looking at several policies that two presidential two president administrations have made pertaining to surveillance and interrogation, which kind of goes into public policy. So my research question is, how did the powers of the president expand post 9/11, and to what extent did the changes influence American democratic values? Um, a comment that Professor Sharp made on my proposal was that what kind of democratic values I was talking about. So I couldn't focus on all the democratic values because that would have just made my paper a lot larger than what I initially imposed. But so I'm just kind of focusing on liberty and justice in terms of those democratic values. So there has been a little bit of research done in the past pertaining to this topic. I'm pretty sure there is a lot more because presidential powers, executive power overall, and its expansion is a broad topic. There's so much information out there. But it was kind of hard to find some research particularly pertaining to my topic. So there is one research that I found. It's by Carmans and Fowler, 2017, which argued that the expansion of executive power and the decline in legislative authority have been fueled by complementary forces of increased congressional polarization and decreased legislative capacity. So this article basically focuses on bipartisan um, legislation in Congress and how it affects the executive branch. And it talks about how Congress has delayed and failed in passing appropriation bills to enacting less legislation overall. It basically talks about how Congress has failed to kind of oversee some of the actions that are taken by presidents and how it has failed to do its job. And it mainly focuses on expansion. It mainly focuses on President Obama's presidency. Um, Another research was done by it was done recently by Sarah Burns, who talked about she basically established a metric for evaluating congressional deliberations on military operations. She focuses on war in Iraq in 2000 and military operations against ISIS in 2014, which is basically under Obama's she heavily focuses on Obama's administration. And she concludes that under these two operations, neither compelled the merits of action from Congress or ensured accountability for the executive branch, therefore giving presidents more power than they deliberately might have in the Constitution. Again, this research also talks about military power expansion rather than other factors. And the intention of my research paper will be to look at other factors rather than only military power, and see if presidential powers have expanded there in any way. For the purpose of this paper, it sounds reasonable to kind of only focus on President Bush's administration right after 9/11 and see what kind of actions he's taken. That kind of tells us the ways his powers were expanded. But going into it, I found that there's a lot of research done on this. However, there isn't like they don't really go deeper into it. So for this, I just decided to focus on President Bush and President Obama for a little bit. It makes sense to talk about President Bush because he was initially the president at the time of 9/11. But I find that President Bush also, President Obama also took some actions that kind of explains how power is expanded. So President Bush took unilateral action to go to war against the Taliban. He also enacted and legislated the United States Patriot Act of 2001, which a lot of research kind of talks about. I'm also going to talk about how the powers did expand through the President's Surveillance Program, the PCP, and how his administration used enhanced interrogation techniques to kind of go about what he wanted to do without the consent of Congress. So one of the literature review that will support my argument is Owen's 2006, which focuses on the expansion of U.S. executive power in times of war, specifically focusing on Bush after 9/11 and how his administration approach to the powers and authority of the presidency was strategic, carefully calculated, and assertive. And another research that I'll talk about is another literature review that I will talk about is CUNY from 2010, which explores the constitutionality of the President's Surveillance Program and the critiques the Bush administration's legal explanations supporting those warrantless surveillance. Okay, so another literature review is Sinha's 2014, which focuses on the ways the National Security Agency NSA program has used surveillance since shortly after 9/11 and argues that the program violates the covenant or violating the rights to privacy. The reason why I will be using this literature review is to kind of defend my second half of the question, my research question, which is on democratic values and how presidential power expansion affects those rights, and it affects them because right after NSA surveillance against Americans, it kind of protected their privacy. So I'll be kind of using this article to kind of defend that argument. And for another one is Fox's 2013, which analyzes some of the problems inherent in the Patriot Act, where the Bush administration rapidly maneuvered the passage and the virtual non-existence of initial congressional approach, which caused irrationality and paranoia. In addition, Johnson's 2007 paper discusses Bush administration's engagement in unlawful policies, espousing an extreme view of expansive presidential power during times of war and national emergency. The article looks at the administration's interrogation techniques, where it had refused to let the government or Congress know of CIA's methods in advice by the U.S. Department of Justice Department of Legal Counsel, OLC. It was only after it was leaked Congress took actions against the scrutiny of enacting the Detainee Treatment Act of 2005 DTA, 13 and the Military Commission Act of 2006. The point of this article for my research paper is again to defend my second part of the research paper, how it affects democratic values. And for that, I'll in addition to looking at surveillance, I'll also be looking at interrogation tactics and how those has affected public opinion. Apart from looking at President Bush's administration, I've kind of furthered my research into looking at Obama's administration as well. But I'm not going to go too deep into this because there aren't a lot of sources on this except for only just military force. So like I've said, the purpose of my paper is not to only look at military force, but to look at other factors like surveillance and interrogation tactics. But I do want to talk about some of the military force that Obama used and his justification for using that, which he kind of quoted, which his administration quoted the AUMF to justify his continuation of airstrikes against ISIS, and how future presidents will also quote this policy to kind of justify their powers. At last, there are two literature reviews which kind of look at surveillance and how it affects democratic values. So the first one is Sims 2007, which talks about Bush administration's warrantless surveillance and how it was illegal and unconstitutional. It also dissects the assertions advanced to justify the program, FISA, and views that there needs to be a more vigorous debate about how government surveillance should be oversighted in the future. And the other one is Richards 2013, which explains the dangers of surveillance, and he says that it can chill the exercise of our civil liberties, and intellectual surveillance can also prevent people from experimenting with new, controversial, or deviant ideas. So overall, my thesis statement is that executive power expanded fundamentally post 9/11 with the overwhelming support of bipartisan Congress and has undermined American values, especially pertaining to justice and liberty. And these are just my sources. I haven't added all the sources that I will be using in the paper, but these are the ones that I've used for doing this presentation.